Hello, Santa Paula. My name is Ryder Todd Smith. I'm with a firm called Tripeppi Smith, and I'm joined today by Dr. Justin Levitt with National Demographics Corporation. We are making a recording today about the transition to district elections in the city of Santa Paula. The city has invested in Tripeppi Smith in NDC to provide outreach and communication support and demography services to help lead the community through this process. And as part of that investment in empowering the community, they've recorded videos. These videos we're recording today, in addition to recording other discussions and platforms to help make sure the public is informed about this process. So today we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to be joined by Dr. Justin Levitt, and we're going to walk through a series of items and hopefully in about an hour empower you with a bunch of knowledge. I will also note that we are doing a Spanish language translation of this and recording a separate Spanish language voice overlay video that will, of course, be made available to the public as well in Santa Paula to make sure we're inclusive of our Spanish language speaking community. And clearly the meeting is being recorded because here we are magically probably being watched by you. Well, certainly being watched by you if you're hearing my voice outside of when we're actually doing this meeting. Next slide. So as I noted, my name is Ryder Smith. I'm with a firm called Tripeppi Smith. We do a bunch of communications work for city governments all up and down the state of California, helping them outreach and communicate with their residents and make sure they're informed, educated, and involved in their local governments. And Dr. Levitt, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Greetings. My name is Dr. Justin Levitt. For those of you who are involved in the process, Daniel, you might know my colleague, Daniel Smith. He actually could not be here tonight, and so I'm replacing him, and I look forward to working with you tonight and through the rest of the project.
And just for context, Dr. Levitt and I have worked together a number of other public agencies, counties, and cities throughout the state of California. So at the end of the day, National Demographics Corporation is the largest demographer in the state of California, having been responsible for the vast majority of district formations in the state for cities. And so the city could not have hired a more experienced firm in the state of California to lead the city through this process. So it's always a pleasure to get to work with NDC on one of these district formation projects. Next slide. So today we have some simple goals for you watching this video. Our goal is for you to learn from the experts. This is a once in a, well, it is a first time ever process, and you'll only do it once. You'll only go to districts once, at least by any reasonable perception of where the future is going to be. So our goal is to make sure through the city's empowerment and efforts that you are fully educated and versed on this process and all the complicated laws and rules that go into creating districts and district elections. And so while you might be listening to experts like myself and Dr. Levitt, ultimately, we're experts on district formation, but you are the experts on the community. And so part of our goal certainly is to educate you and inform you enough that you can then provide the critical expertise you have on the community of Santa Paula to empower the work that we're doing to help draw maps and districts for the city. So it's not enough that we just be the experts and do this. We really genuinely, and the state law even makes it a point of identifying that community feedback in this process is absolutely critical to the success of district formation and then subsequent years redistricting processes. And then last but not least, we're going to also go over some really awesome mapping tools that Dr. Levitt's going to share. This is one of kind of, in my mind, a really interesting part about the district and redistricting process in California, which is it's one of the few public policy areas where you can really empower the public with the very similar tools to what the demographers and the experts are using, so that you can directly draw maps and really try to solve this problem of drawing districts that represent communities of interest in the city of Santa Paula. And there's just very few public policy challenges out there that are like that. So in that regard, it's really an exciting way to be involved in such a critical function. And then last, having watched these videos, we hope that you leave empowered on how to give effective feedback, how to give timely feedback, how to draw maps, how to identify communities of interest, and that you're really well informed so that in this somewhat esoteric and complex process, you are really in a great position to be an active member in the process and help the city move through the districting process successfully. Next slide. Now, ultimately, you're here watching this video, which already tells me you care, but here's a few other reasons why I think you should care and why you may want to talk to your neighbors and friends about getting involved in this process. Number one, first and foremost, democracy works better when the people are engaged. When you engage in your local government, which is the easiest form of government to be involved with, because you can see your council members at the grocery store, meet them at the church pews, walk down to City Hall, or drive briefly over to City Hall to participate in a city council meeting. It just works better when residents are engaged and informed. Having an engaged process in what is foundational to democracy, which is how we elect our representatives, is super important. Number two, as I noted, you are the experts in the community. While Dr. Levitt has done hundreds of district formation processes, and he certainly is familiar with the background in Santa Paula, he doesn't live in Santa Paula. So you do, and you're the expert in that community. So it's really a great time to shine with your expertise you have on the community. And when I talk about community, that's broadly the community of Santa Paula at large, but equally important when it comes to this later discussion we're going to have about communities of interest. You're an expert in your neighborhood. You're an expert on who lives across the street, what church you go to, where your kids go to school, what you're involved with. That kind of brings your neighborhood together, and being able to understand what your neighborhood is, and how you would like to see it perhaps remain intact as the lines are drawn and not get divided up, is going to be super important in this process. You have very direct local knowledge about your life experience in Santa Paula. That's going to be really helpful. And then finally, this is first of all once in a lifetime opportunity, because we don't really foresee that there's going to be a moving away from districts and then going back to districts. So let's just assume you're going to go to districts once. In fact, Dr. Levitt, is there any example of a city having gone to districts who then left districts?
Certainly not since the California Voting Rights Act made districts sort of the preferred mode of election throughout the state.
Yeah, so we can't imagine a world in which districts are going to disappear. So assume that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that the city is going to go to districts. And then there is this thing called redistricting, because the districts are based upon population data and information. Whenever there's a new census, which happens every 10 years, so the next one will happen in 2030, there will be a redistricting process. So whatever work we do here with the city of Santa Paula to create districts, those districts will, in all likelihood, remain and be in effect until probably 2032, when there's the next city election, or 2031, thereabouts. So as a result, you can anticipate that we're going to have these districts with us for 9 years, and then we're going to have a chance to go through the redistricting process. So point is, this is going to affect you for a long period of time, and we want to make sure we get it right out the gate. All right, next slide. So I think with that, I want to hand it over to Dr. Levitt. He's going to provide some background on why we're even doing this districting process right now, and walk you through some of that information to really empower you with the knowledge that I talked about today. So Dr. Levitt, the floor is yours.
All right, sure. Thank you, Ryder. And I just really want to emphasize the point that he made, that this is your opportunity to get it on the ground floor and really influence how districts are drawn for this first time. Because I can guarantee in 2031, 2032, when we're redrawing the map, we're going to be looking at these current districts that we draw through this process as kind of a point of comparison, even if the district lines change. And so what we're looking at doing here today is talking about changing the method of election from an at-large system to a by-district system. And the reason the city is considering this is the same reason many other cities throughout the state have already made this change: the California Voting Rights Act. The California Voting Rights Act is a 2002 law that basically makes it easier to challenge at-large system of elections. And in order to prevent the city from facing financial and legal risks, the city has opted to make this transition now. And so we're going through this process of drawing districts, which will first be used in the 2024 election, in order to comply with the California Voting Rights Act. And I should mention, once you have district elections, you're no longer eligible for a lawsuit under the California Voting Rights Act. If I go to the next slide, tonight we're going to be really looking at 4 different stages. First, I'm going to give you an overview of the process and the rules. We're going to talk a little bit about the data. Then we're going to go to the mapping tools, and I'm going to demo the mapping tools for you. Then afterwards, we're going to have a conversation about neighborhoods and communities of interest, and then ultimately wrap up with talking about some of the next steps. If we go on to the next slide, Looking at those rules that I just mentioned, we really divide them into three categories. In the left-hand column, our federal laws are things that the Supreme Court and other federal courts tell us we must comply with. For example, equal population. The Supreme Court says that districts must have more or less the same number of residents. And this is total residents, so it includes everyone, children, non-citizens, everyone counted as part of that 2020 census count. And for our purposes, we use the census adjusted count that really takes into account the incarcerated population and redistributes them back to their residences. Now, they don't expect you to get perfectly equal districts. We have a maximum deviation or difference between the largest and smallest districts of up to 10%. When we look at the data in a couple of slides, we're going to talk more about that. Our second rule is the Voting Rights Act. While race cannot be the only factor or the predominant factor in the creation of a district, protected class communities, groups that have historically faced discrimination or barriers to registration and voting, must have their rights taken into account. And so we're going to look at that numerically as part of our analysis. And we'll explain more about that, what that means as we look at some of those racial maps. In the middle column, we have our new 2019 Fair Maps Act requirements. The Fair Maps Act is a fairly new law that was used by cities and counties in this redistricting, and it lays out some requirements that we must comply with in this order. So first, our districts must be geographically contiguous. This means that all parts of the district must touch. We must have, in other words, one boundary outside the district containing the entire district. Although it's not part of the legal definition in the law, one way to think about this is you must be able to walk and drive from one part of the district to any other part of the district without leaving the district. You know, the law specifically says all parts must touch, but I know that, at least for me, that was a confusing, what does that actually mean? And so from a practical standpoint, you must have that one outside boundary. Second, undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. This is the part where we actually turn to you the most to help us understand where there are those socioeconomic or geographic areas that should be kept together, as the law says, for the purposes of their effective and fair representation. We're going to talk more about communities of interest later, but start thinking about what that means for our conversation later. Third, easily identifiable boundaries is the principle that districts should be easy for voters to understand. So to the extent that we can follow major roads, that we can follow natural and man-made boundaries, whether they be canals or rivers, canyons, development boundaries, something that would make it easy for a person to understand which district they live in. And fourth, compactness, which the law defines as not bypassing one group of people to get to a more distant group of people. This is clearly aimed at hooks and fingers and odd geography that can only be explained by reference to factors beyond this list. Note that these are in rank order. So if we do have a community that's oddly shaped, maybe because it's a natural feature, we do keep that community together first before we worry about compactness. And finally, the Fair Maps Act also prohibits us from considering, favoring, or discriminating against a political party. And so partisanship is not part of this process. And the third column, other traditional districting principles. These are factors that courts have recognized as being valid. While they are after all of the criteria in numbers 1 and 2, and they are optional, we don't have to consider them if we do not want to, the courts do recognize them as being valid to consider. So for example, respecting the voters' choices, that's the principle that the voters of the city have elected a council, and that can be taken into account as we look at drawing the boundaries. Maybe so that we don't, by accident, prevent a council member from running for re-election with the stroke of a pen on the map. The last one, future population growth. If we know that there's going to be in a neighborhood or a block or an area that's going to have major population growth in the next 5 to 10 years, we can consider that within the bounds of equal population. So underpopulating an area where we think there might be more growth is valid as long as we stay within that maximum 10% limit. We go on to the next slide. let's actually take a look at some of the data. And I'm sorry for the text, that random text above the chart should just say City of Santa Paula. The city was counted by the 2020 census, and our adjusted population count we're using here. It was 30,772 residents. We divide this number by 5 to get our ideal population, what we're aiming for in each district, of about 6,150 residents. That means for the purposes of our deviation, we can be about 300 people over or under this ideal population, but any more than that, and we're probably going to be above our 10% deviation. Now, looking at the racial numbers, the city was counted as 82% Latino or Hispanic by total population and 72% by citizen voting age population. Citizen voting age population is the population over 18 with US citizenship. The courts often use this as what they call the eligible voter count. The reason, as we can understand, is that the Latino community tends to be younger, tends to be less likely to be citizens, and it's possible to draw in some places districts that would be majority Latino by total population that don't have a functional Latino majority by eligible voters. And so the courts have settled on citizen voting age population as the solution to that. And so if we go on to the next slide, we look at this map, we're going to be using citizen voting age population for our voting rights analysis. And what we clearly see is the areas that are in the yellows and pinks are majority Latino. Yellow is over 65% Latino, pink is over 75% Latino. And the blues and purples, the cooler colors, are under 35% Latino. And what we see here is that most of the central part of the city is majority Latino. In fact, is more than 75% Latino. There are no real populations of African Americans, Asian Americans, or Native Americans that rise to the voting rights issue. However, if there are communities, we can certainly include that under our analysis of communities of interest. And so, please do bring that up and discuss that as part of our discussion of community of interest. Going on to the next slide, looking at neighborhoods more specifically. With neighborhoods, obviously we're going to be thinking about this in terms of that communities of interest definition in the Fair Maps Act. Now, I like to think about neighborhoods specifically as the Lego building blocks of the maps. They are small, geographically defined areas, such as an apartment complex or a homeowners association or small development of properties built by a single developer at a single point in time. Maybe it's a planning area, such as a specific neighborhood plan or community plan or business improvement district. What really defines neighborhood specifically is its geographic boundary. That's the second question. And the more specific we get, the easier it is to understand what that neighborhood is, to give it a name and to draw it together on a map. We really don't want to break apart neighborhoods as much as we can avoid it, other than we need to for equal population. And so understanding the geography of the neighborhood is really the core of communities of interest. And to what degree can we help you use some of our other maybe planning records or aerial photography to understand where these neighborhood boundaries are. But specifically, neighborhoods should have these geographic boundaries. What streets, what parcels, what precincts, what other units comprise this particular neighborhood. If we go to the next slide, I think we'll see a couple of maps that show us perhaps where some neighborhoods are. For example, we have a planning map here, and we can see where we have single family home zones, as well as those zoned for more higher density living, industrial areas and commercial areas. If we go to the next slide, I believe we have a business improvement or property improvement district along Main Street. Again, look at the clearly defined geographic boundary, clearly distinguishing which parcels are in this particular district. When we talk about neighborhood, we are talking about something this precise, where we do have these very clear boundaries. we go on to the next slide, this really elementary attendance areas are another kind of example of this as well. If we go on to the next slide, communities of interest are made up of neighborhoods. And what really defines a community of interest as opposed to a neighborhood is that it's that small geographic building block plus something that it has in common with its neighbors. And so a neighborhood can be in lots of different communities of interest. And because those shared issues and characteristics may vary. For example, you may have one community of interest that is that elementary school attendance area because that's where your kid goes to school. And that could look slightly different from the community of interest you have dealing with the new traffic development, circle they're trying to put in up the street from where you live. And that could be a different community of interest than the area that's impacted by a particular commercial facility. For example, that In-N-Out drive-through, those are the kinds of things that can be those shared issues that bring a community together. Now, really what we're looking to understand as part of this process are these types of communities, these types of shared issues or characteristics that benefit from being included in a single district for the purpose of their effective and fair representation. Because especially when we're talking about cities and the Fair Maps Act, as I said, a neighborhood can belong to a lot of different communities of interest. Which one or ones are the most relevant when it comes to our relationship with our city's government? We may come up with a different answer with the school district or with the water district or with the county or other levels of government, but we're going to have some sort of way that we need to interact with the city. And I gave you some examples as traffic and development, but it could also be just simply shared characteristics that you may not think of as a community, like where we see renters versus homeowners or single and multifamily housing. And we want to think about this because potential communities may benefit from having more than one representative. And so we need to think about which of these relationships benefit from having a single point of contact on the city council, particularly that direct electoral connection. And just as a reminder, this is not about partisanship or incumbency or political candidates. This is simply about those shared concerns and issues that relate to city government. If we go on to the next slide, we can see in the data, although data can't tell the entire story, it can help us give us a first pass at understanding where communities differ. And I love putting these two maps side by side, because as we see here on the left, we have renters. On the right, we have where we see multifamily housing or apartments and condominiums. And we see that we have renters throughout much of the central part of the city. But apartments are concentrated a little bit more on the western side of the city. And so there's an area in the southeast that has a high percentage of renters, but not necessarily that same high density of multifamily housing. And so maybe there's an interesting story there about two different communities of interest: renting but single family housing and renting in apartments and condominiums. That's a potential difference between these two neighborhoods that might be relevant. But this is where we need your help. Understand, is this something, or is this just statistical noise? Is this just something that we see on the map that doesn't actually mean anything to residents in the city? Similarly, if we go to the next slide, we see same kinds of interesting patterns when it comes to income and education. Where we see the lowest income neighborhoods in the city is not necessarily where we see the lowest levels of education. Again, is this something that we should think about, or is this not something relevant to Santa Paula? If we go to the next slide, again, looking at where we see Spanish spoken at home, where we have children located at home, we have a lot of data in our data set. And we use all of it to try to understand where we see these differences between different parts of the city. But it really doesn't substitute for your knowledge, your day-to-day living knowledge of the community. Let's go on to the next slide if we can. So in order to help you provide us with the information to make this map the best map possible, we've put together a bunch of different tools for some different purposes. I'm going to be flipping over to the website in a second, but just so you know, drawsantapaula.org has all of this information on it. And so let's flip over to this website now. This is linked on the city's homepage, and it has a lot of great information on it. When you land on it, it'll be on a welcome page. We have these 2 videos here in English and Spanish that'll help you understand it. And you can automatically translate the web page into a whole bunch of different languages. Let me talk about what we have on the website first. We have our full schedule on the website, including links to all of the presentations, recordings, press releases, flyers. We're trying to put as much as we can up here. And as we add additional events, we add our information up here. So for example, our next workshop on December 1st, we've already got our press release and flyer up. We also have our future public hearings and workshops on the schedule here as well. This community workshop, for example, on January 21st, that's going to be with the maps. So at that point, we'll have big printouts of the maps, and I assume we'll have some way to give your feedback on those maps at that time in a more relaxed setting. On our draft maps webpage, when we have our draft maps available in January, this is where they'll be posted. You'll also see a link to the interactive review map. The interactive review map basically has a lot of those demographics that I mentioned already available on it. So if you want to see, for example, the percentage of renters or multifamily housing, you can pull that up. You can zoom in and out. You can even go to the base map and change it to imagery if you want to try to see specifics. Also, you can search for addresses up here in the search bar. And we'll be updating that interactive web viewer as we go through the process with the draft maps when they're available. Now, let's talk about how you can leave feedback or leave a comment for us. There's a bunch of different ways of doing so, and I'm going to do so, and I'm going to list them out in order of difficulty. For those of you who want to just provide basic feedback, we have a contact form. Fill out the information, first name, last name, email, and leave us any feedback on the process, on communities of interest, on whatever map you like, whatever you want as part of this process. This goes right to our email, districting@spcity.org. And basically, all of the emails we get through the contact form will be provided to both us as the demographer and to the city council to understand how the process is going for you. Secondly, we have a neighborhood survey. A neighborhood survey really asks you sort of leading questions, if you will, about communities of interest. It's trying to get you to think about communities of interest by asking you questions like, where is your community located? What are the geographic definitions of your community? What is the common social and economic interest? So you don't have to answer every single question, but the more information you provide, especially the more detail you provide, the easier it is for us to understand and incorporate your feedback into our maps. Finally, draw on your own map. We're actually seeing these come in almost every day. So I hope that we will continue to get feedback on this maps as we continue through the process. First, I'll talk about the public participation kit. This is simply just a one-page PDF. We have the population numbers, the total population. So for example, 191 people live north of Telegraph Road along Padre Lane. And all you need to do is start getting out your calculators and add these numbers together until you hit that ideal population of about 6,150 residents. I would say at least half of our maps, probably more, have come in through these simple paper mapping tools with the total population counts. All you need to do is, kind of color in the different areas and then take a picture of it on your phone. That's how most people are doing it these days. or scan it, and send that to districting@spcity.org, or simply drop it off at City Hall. There's also, you can find these population numbers and see more detail on the boundaries on the interactive web viewer. And then if you want to go block by block and really go into detail, we do have a tool called Dave's Redistricting, or DRA, that lets you do this. Now, I won't lie, DRA does have a bit of a learning curve. You have to set up an account, and then you have to copy our map and then spend time learning basically how to do redistricting or districting in general. But if you spend the time to learn, this is a really powerful tool that really mirrors a lot of the resources that we have as your demographer. So I would, if you're interested, I would definitely recommend, whoops, let me just reopen that, looking at some of the resources we have. We have a 5-minute video tutorial and a step-by-step user guide to using Dave's Redistricting. Please reach out, obviously, if you have questions as well. When you get to the mapping tool, you'll create an account. Once you have an account, you'll be able to click this little paintbrush here. That makes an editable copy of the map that you can then see will show up in your list of maps. Give it a second here because it's not going to load in right away. It takes a second or two to upload. When you double click on that, it opens up. I like to turn on the map overlay here because that shows me all the roads and other features. And then really it's just select the district you want to modify, hit the paintbrush tool, and you can start painting. And I'm just drawing random here. Note that as you paint, you'll see that the population gets added to total population, and you can see the population deviation. My deviation is way too big here, but that's okay for our purposes. Let's say you want to go into more detail. Well, this tool allows you to go down to the block level simply by selecting block. When you hit block, you select the precinct you want to modify. It will divide that precinct into blocks, and then you can move the blocks you want to move into the districts. And then when you go back to precinct, it'll record that change you've made. You can do the same thing when you want to move something out. Let's say I just want to move these 2 blocks out of the district. I can do that as well. When you're finished with one district, you just select the radial button to go to the next one, and then you can paint. And continue doing that until you finish your district map, or if you want, just the district or 2 districts that you want to create. Don't feel obligated in any way to submit a full district map. When you're done, you go back to this main page, select the map, and just go to share. Then you just copy this URL, and you can hit the copy button. Go back to the website, go to districting@spcity.org, and email this URL to us. That allows me to go in and view your map so that we can draw it in. And our commitment is to draw in every map that we receive through Dave's Redistricting, through the paper public participation kit, or however you want to provide it. But as long as you submit a map, we'll draw it in. I do think Dave's Redistricting is a really powerful tool. And for those of you who spend the time to learn it, you'll probably find it very rewarding. The email, I should just mention, also allows us to get in contact with you if you have any questions or we have any questions about your map. And so with that, why don't we flip on back to the presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Lovett. I appreciate it. So, and it was curious to hear that you've been receiving maps. That's a good sign. That's healthy. I think ultimately, as you probably already stated, our best scenario is when it's a citizen-driven map that is the one that eventually is adopted by a council or something close to it. And that's happens more often than not. So that's considered a win. I am I'm not sure if you're allowed to disclose this at this point, but how many maps do you think you've gotten at this point in the process?
Oh, I was worried you're going to ask that question because I'm not sure what our current count is, but I know it was just one this morning even. So we're receiving at least one every couple of days at this point.
And I would say by our standards, that's a pretty good pace, right? From
Oh
your
yeah,
experience.
especially for a city the size of Santa Paula.
So we'll take that as a good sign that there's an engaged community out there submitting, and that's exciting. We and from our perspective as outreach and demographers, that's exactly the kind of engagement we're always looking for in these processes. Okay, so as was noted, we just already covered this slide. So there is no Q&A host at this point since we're recording this, but I will just note that Justin, as he referenced, we have an email available to participate and communicate, and there's going to be some upcoming community workshops to also further discuss these. So up in December and January, as you can see on the screen, there are going to be sessions either December 1st, 2022 at the Church of Guadalupe at 6 p.m. And then on January 21st of 2023, so next year, at the Santa Paula Youth Center at Los Padres Park at 10 a.m. So, and there what you're seeing is that we're trying to do this both in the evening hours as well as in the morning hours to accommodate for people who have different work and life schedules and give everybody a chance to to participate in this process.
And let's just note that the January 21st meeting is on a Saturday. So we're trying to give people the chance to participate on the weekends as well.
Yes. And that's really reflecting the city's commitment of wanting to provide as many avenues as possible for the public to participate in this process and be involved in setting out the kind of demographic / district map future for the city of Santa Paula. And, to be clear, the workshops are designed where the public gets to engage in conversations with each other as neighbors, as well as ask questions of officials that are in the room to have a more informal conversation about the district formation process. And we draw a distinction between workshops that are designed for that kind of back and forth and collaboration, whereas the public hearings that are a formalized process that marches through the adoption and formal adoption that happen in front of the city council, while that's certainly valuable feedback, and those hearings are a great chance to offer insights, that's a more structured process that doesn't really allow for the back and forth conversation that is much more accommodated by workshops. So we always encourage workshops to be an effective way to both learn, both for the public to learn, but for us to also hear from the public and learn directly. And they happen earlier on in the process that really help set the foundation for some of the mapping that's being considered. We'll go to the next slide. There is this neighborhood survey, which is a great way for you to provide that feedback. Justin went over some of those details on the drawsantapaula.org website, which is really the kind of epicenter for all information on the district or the district formation process. So we encourage folks to visit the neighborhood survey and indicate what their communities of interest are and what their neighborhoods look like, so we can have that information conveyed over to Dr. Levitt and the team at NDC so they can use that information for map drawing and consideration and evaluation of other maps. And I really shouldn't say just their own evaluation, but all that information also makes it to the city council for their consideration as well. And let's go to the next slide. And then finally, we want you to make sure you share your thoughts, right? So clearly we have a website here dedicated to empowering you with information, has all the links and the training materials to use Dave's redistricting tool. But you can also just email. If you email districting@spcity.org, that email gets to the appropriate people. You can ask questions, you can submit feedback, you can submit maps you've drawn. That is your single source of contact or direct way to make sure you're making contact as part of the official record and to ask questions and engage in this process. So we strongly encourage you to use that email address in the course of your active involvement in the district formation process in the city of Santa Paula. Next slide. And with that, it's going to bring our recording of this presentation to a close. Dr. Levitt, is there anything else you'd like to say in conclusion before I wrap it up?
Just thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing your maps and comments.
And I 100% support that. Dr. Levitt, I appreciate your time. And more importantly, I appreciate the 40+ minutes of community member time watching this recording and learning more. Engaging in this process with your community is an important step in the district formation process. The city has a sincere interest in hearing from every corner of the city and making this an effective process. And they have the experts on board to help make this happen for the community. With that, we'll bring this to a close. Thank you for your interest. Have a good day.